Hi, everybody. Before I get started, I just want to say I'm so happy to be here. I've been to every Monktoberfest, and Steve and Kate had put on a great show every single year. I look forward to this thing all year. I've met tons of great people here, and I just want to thank them for the opportunity to be here. It's really, really exciting. And I can also say that, unfortunately, I've not tried every beer ever served at Monktoberfest. I made an effort, but I'm not sure it's possible. Kudos to anybody who has. I certainly don't remember all the beers I've had here. So yeah, my talk is called Mint is about sorting apples, and I'll just get into it. So as Steve said, I work at Etsy. I came to the first Monktoberfest. I was interviewing at Etsy at the time, and so I've been there almost 4 years as well. And as I was preparing this talk, what I realized is, so we're known for a lot of interesting things about our engineering culture at Etsy. One of the ones that I think is probably not publicly spoken of as much is that people who've been at Etsy for a long time are oftentimes invited to give a last lecture before they leave. And so as I was writing this, I realized that if I were giving a last lecture, which I'm totally not, this is what would be in it right now. So like this is kind of like what I think about Etsy after 4 years in some ways. And when I first went to Etsy, like, these were the words that really interested me. I was not a big Etsy shopper. Etsy's a huge online market for handmade goods. I was a huge fan of their engineering blog. Like the nerdy things they did were what was super interesting to me. And the big part of that was continuous deployment. I'd worked at small companies that were like super waterfall-y, and we released things every 3 weeks, and we had to negotiate with QA about what could go into every release, and it was slowly driving me crazy. And so here was a place that like people just push code all the time. It's like, I'm a developer. What I want to do is push code all the time. This is living the dream. And so indeed, Etsy does push code all the time. I showed this graph. I spoke 3 years ago, and so the graph was 3 years further back. And so what you can see is like this is the number of pushes per day, basically every day since they rolled out continuous deployment. And what's interesting about this is that when I started, again, 3 years ago, we had about 300 people total and maybe 100 engineers. Now Etsy's over 800 people, and we have maybe 250 or 300 engineers. And you can see, in the meantime, we've also gone public. We've built lots of new things, more teams, more features, more everything. And we're still just cranking it out, pushing code constantly. And in fact, so this blue part are config pushes. So because we had so many pushes and so many people pushing, we actually had to split the push queue. And so now there are 2 push queues going simultaneously all the time. So we're actually pushing almost twice the amount of code now, twice the amount of changes, not twice the amount of code, as we were 3 years ago. And so yeah, how does a company actually do this, and how do you maintain it when the company gets so much bigger and you hire so many new people? So strangely, one of the first things I discovered after I got to Etsy was like blameless postmortems were this key thing. I didn't really know what a blameless postmortem was when I got there. I can still remember when I went to the first one, someone had made a database change. It broke replication. Lots of bad things happened. And I'd heard people talking about it in IRC, and I was like, oh man, I know what happened. This dude screwed up. Like, we're gonna go sit in this room, and it's gonna be like, oh, I typed this thing in, and oh my God, I didn't know what I was doing, or I put the wrong command or whatever. And so we sat there for an hour, and we talked for 30 or 40 minutes about how it all unfolded and what they did to fix it. And it turns out that another person had queued up a bunch of changes the night before, and they're like, I'm gonna come in tomorrow morning, and I'm gonna deploy all these changes. So person B, the actual person who in my opinion had probably screwed up, came in, did what was essentially the right thing, accidentally pushed the stuff the other person had queued up because they didn't talk to each other. And so there was like this subtle thing, and in the end we did some remediation items and figured out how not to do it in the future. But everything about it was more complicated than I would have thought, and I wouldn't have known it had I not gone to the postmortem. So it was super interesting, and like I was like, oh, this is a thing, and then kind of following that, there was an article about Etsy in some publication, maybe Business Insider. It was about how we do blameless postmortems, and then our now CTO John Allspaw wrote a post about just culture at Etsy. Explaining how postmortems fit in and things like that. And I was like, oh, just culture, I don't really know what that is. And to be honest, like I thought it was a thing we made up. And it wasn't really until I started prepping for this that I learned actually just culture has this really long history, and it's a very specific thing. Maybe other people already knew that. I was ignorant even though I lived in it. And it goes all the way back to 1947. There's this guy, Paul Fitts. He started looking at human factors in aviation. Since then, like as kind of investigations into aviation accidents expanded, they developed this idea of just culture. And what just culture really means is basically not blaming people or punishing them for making mistakes, and being biased toward looking at the process instead of the outcome. That's not to say just culture also means that if people are willfully screwing up, they intentionally do wrong things, they should be punished. But doing your best and making a mistake is not a reason to punish somebody. So I was like, oh, this is cool. I'm learning about this. Again, like my first year at Etsy, I started the Human Factors and System Safety Book Club, which attracted a surprisingly large number of participants. We only ever read one book, but there's still a mailing list. And the book we read is called The Field Guide to Understanding Human Error, which also sounds incredibly dry. And the book is incredibly dry, but it's really, really good. The guy who wrote it is a professor named Sidney Decker, and like what he studies is accident investigation, mainly in transportation. And so kind of like the next chunk of my talk is about some things that I learned from this book. So he starts out in the book talking about the old view of human error that's incredibly prevalent. And if you could describe it in one sentence, it's this: human error is caused by bad apples. Why do bad things happen? People screw up. And this is really a super seductive view for a lot of reasons. One of which is that if you say something bad happened to this person because someone screwed up, it's very easy to tell yourself, I would never screw up that way. Like, look at this guy, they're dumb. Like, I work with this dumb guy, he does dumb things. I don't do dumb things, I'll be fine. And it's also really, really great for institutions, because the institution says, like, we built something awesome, it works great, we hired this loser, they screwed it up, if we fire them, we won't have this problem anymore. Or if we send them to training, they won't screw up this way again. And like, we'll be done, it's fantastic. So we don't really need to assess everything when bad things happen, we just like, blame the bad apple. And like the underlying assumption there is that people are the threat to otherwise safe systems. We build great things, we put people in them, they break them. Terrible, terrible people. So before I go to my next slide, does anyone here from Symantec? Good. Okay. Again, like just a couple of weeks ago, I was reading this article on Ars Technica. Symantec employees fired for issuing rogue HTTPS certificate for Google. And from there, they sent you to the official Symantec blog. And this is their sort of like post-mortem item that they published. I've stolen a couple of things, and I'll apologize for reading them, but I'm going to anyway. We've immediately put in place additional processes and technical controls to eliminate the possibility of human error. Like, what a fantastic idea that is. And then the person who wrote this blog post goes on to say, we discovered that a few outstanding employees who had successfully undergone our stringent onboarding and security trainings failed to follow our policies. Despite their best intentions, this failure to follow policies has led to their termination after a thoughtful review process. So like, I'm not a Symantec customer, but if I were, this would chill me to the bone. It's like, things are happening here, and if you make them happen, you're getting fired. Like, the immediate incentive for anyone who works there is like, oh my God, I better not tell anybody if I screw up. How do I cover this thing up? So like, frankly, like, I'm just putting this in there because like, this is the classic example of the so-called old view. I mean, it's not very old. Here is a large company in our industry bragging about it on their blog. Like, this is strange to me. And the other side of this is of the old view is it also like lets us think a lot about heroism and think good things too. So U.S. Airways Flight 1549 is probably better known as the Miracle on the Hudson. This pilot, Sully Sullenberger, landed an airplane that took off from LaGuardia in the Hudson River, and everyone lived. And from an outcome bias point of view, this is fantastic. Holy crap, something bad happened. This guy is the best pilot in the world. And he landed this plane on the river. He had no time to make a decision. He's incredibly skilled. Great, good outcome. A member of the NTSB said this was the most successful ditching in aviation history. But what's interesting about this is that the NTSB did go and produce a 200-page report about this to validate the decisions that were made, to look into everything, and they issued 33 new safety recommendations to kind of improve safety around monitoring of engine status and dealing with wildlife around airports and all these other things. So they were not satisfied with the good outcome. They wanted to know, how do we improve the process, even though the outcome was not fine. I mean, there was a plane that sank to the bottom of the river, but at least minimally bad, given that a bad thing happened. anyway, Decker goes on and he talks about the new view, kind of a different and better way of looking at human error. And probably the core of that is that human errors are symptoms of deeper trouble. There's something in the system that can potentially go wrong, and when humans make that thing go wrong, then we need to examine the system. This is the whole point. And this is probably potentially my favorite quote from the entire book, which is, errors are the other side of people trying to pursue success in an uncertain, resource-constrained world. And to go on, so, this point is systems are inherently unsafe. One of the things in the books is people in complex systems create safety. They make it their job to anticipate forms of and pathways toward failure so that they don't make these mistakes. They look at the system and make the best of what they have. Kind of tangentially with policies, there are a lot of systems that if you did everything by the policy, they would work horribly. And really the bottom line is that safety is never the only goal in systems people operate. In which people operate. If you're an airline pilot, your goal is to arrive safely, of course, but the airline wants you to arrive on time. There's always some kind of trade-off there, and safety is part of these trade-offs. So this is really the crux of the new view. And conveniently, I have an article about the new view as well. This is from the Register, so you can see it's a completely inflammatory headline. AWS outage knocks Amazon, Netflix, Tinder, and IMDb, and mega, I like all capital, mega data collapse. Cloudpocalypse stalks Sunday sofa servers. This is our industry's greatest news source. People who were on Twitter a couple of Sundays ago, I remember Twitter was blowing up with Amazon status page screenshots, and oh my God, the world is falling apart. Well, unlike Symantec, Amazon is a mature engineering organization, and so they published this summary of what happened, and it looked very much like the output of a postmortem at Etsy, where they said, here's how we set things up, here are all the things that went wrong, here are the additional things that went wrong while we were trying to fix it, here are the things that happened after we thought we fixed it, but we really hadn't fixed everything, and here are the remediation items to make sure this doesn't happen in the future. Were I an AWS customer, I'd feel great about this. These guys are really thinking about what they're doing, and they're open about it. This gives me confidence in them. So, coming back to Etsy a little bit, again, our big thing in this area, what we do are blameless postmortems. And again, I apologize for reading again, but there's something from a blog post at Etsy that's much better than anything I would have come up with ad hoc. So it says, having a blameless postmortem process means that engineers whose actions have contributed to an accident can give a detailed account of what actions they took at the time, what effects they observed, expectations they had, assumptions they had made, and their understanding of the timeline of events as they occurred, and that they can give this detailed account without fear of punishment or retribution. So this is the process that we go through. And what's interesting to me is that we've sort of, even though we've gotten better at a lot of things, we have many more postmortems now than we ever did. More people have been trained to facilitate them, and we have them for smaller and smaller incidents. We have fewer big incidents now, still lots of small incidents, but we still have more and more postmortems. So, and the reason for that is that one of the things we like to say at Etsy is that people are the expert in their own mistakes. Nobody knows what a person's state of mind was when something bad happened better than the person who was in the middle of it. And so if we can make them feel safe and make them feel open to be accountable for what they did, they can really explain what was going on and we can learn from it. If they don't feel safe, that's never going to happen. And that's kind of the crux of the new view. So to make my point, this is actually a content management system we built internally. It's called Morg. We love ASCII art at Etsy. Fortunately not on our public website. And this is just for keeping postmortems. I blacked out some of them because it's nobody's business. There are 3 that I left. 2 of them are for my team, Go Team, and the other one, which I helpfully zoomed. Oh, I wanted to say there are, I think, 341 postmortems in the system now over the past 3 years. So we're basically doing more than one a week. There are a lot. This is ETSI, September 10th, 2015. We have catered lunch on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and one of the lunches, I think they sent out a survey, it made 40% of the people who ate it sick. So they actually had the caterers who brought the lunch came in and went through our normal engineering postmortem process with the caterers, so they could explain, basically explain the timeline of what happened and the choices that they made that led to a bunch of people really not feeling good, including me. And they sent out a survey, how many people were made sick, and I filled it out at 5, and I was like, I feel fine, no worries. And then I had to go send another survey later that night. No, me too. Turns out unsprouted black beans were the issue. Anyway, so So the real point I want to make about Etsy is that there is no continuous deployment without just culture. Like, this is actually the enabling technology for everything that we do in terms of going fast and doing things well. When you look at a company that rolled out continuous deployment when it had maybe 20 or 25 engineers and is now doing it the same way with 10 times that many people, if you have people hiding information from each other, if you have teams that won't share, if you're not learning from mistakes as they happen, like, it's just all going to fall apart. We'd be breaking the site every day. But because we have a culture where people can be really open about what they're doing and learn from each other, we're able to kind of continue this thing on as the company gets much, much bigger and goes through some disruptive things. Like, one of the things, Etsy went public this year, and that's a hugely disruptive event for any company. And we've managed to maintain this continuous deployment even through that, which a lot of people didn't think we were going to be able to do. So it's because like, basically because of these blameless post-mortems and because people feel safe talking about mistakes that they made. So I still haven't really talked about management, and that's like the actual, this has all been a big setup. And so it's a big setup for something I kind of made up, which is just management. And basically what happened was, as I was reading this book on understanding human error, I thought, oh my gosh, this actually applies to every aspect of management, or not just management, but working with other people. One of the core things about the new view is this idea of local rationality. And what they mean by that is that in a situation, people want to do well. They want to succeed. They want to do things the right way. And so if they wind up doing things the wrong way, it's because there's something missing at the time that they needed, right? It's not that they said, oh, I don't care, I don't whatever. Like, they want to do a good job. And like, you know, the guy says in the book, in human factors, you have to assume that nobody comes to work to do a bad job. And I feel the same way, like, as a manager, I feel the same way. Like, you can't assume people come to work to do a bad job. People come to work to do a good job, or at least do a good enough job to keep their job. Some people aren't into doing an awesome job. So when bad things happen, like, they're as surprised as anybody. They didn't sit there and go, like, hey, I'm taking the database down now. It's like, hey, I'm making a schema change. Like, what could possibly go wrong? They were missing some key bit of information they really needed when that happened. And kind of go deeper. This is actually not from the book. I have quotes from other places. People do things that make sense to them, given their goals, understanding of the situation, and focus of attention at the time. So to go back to Sully Sullenberger a little bit, my favorite guy, you know, he landed this plane on the Hudson, and if you go back to this previous quote, you know, his goal was to land the plane safety. His understanding of the situation was, you know, he could fly the plane into a populated area and potentially have an even greater loss of life attempting to fly to an airport that he didn't think he could make it to. And the focus of his attention was, this happened at very low altitude. He had only seconds to make a decision. So in truth, whether that plane crashed and everyone was killed, or it landed safely and everyone survived, you have to evaluate his decision based on the information that he had on the time. So that was a good or a bad decision whether or not the water landing was successful. Turns out the NTSB found that it was a good decision. They ran tons of simulations, dug into it in a lot of ways, and they found that the water landing was in fact the only viable choice, which was really interesting. And like, that's the point of local rationality, is that he had a very short time to make a decision and like a lot of inputs. And his local rationality turned out to be pretty darn good. And so as I think about this in terms of management, like, it's really easy to think about safety trade-offs, like speed or safety or other things are safety. But in fact, like, all of our jobs are really about managing trade-offs. So like, you know, do we want to push to finish this project really quickly, or do we want happy employees? You know, do we spend more money, or do we spend more time optimizing? You know, more money on AWS, or more time optimizing our code, or whatever it is. And like, it doesn't matter whether you're the CEO of the company or a manager or an IC1 we just hired. You're still managing this kind of goal conflict where you have these inputs and you're trying to figure out what to do. And the trick of management is to understand the local rationality of the people that you work with, and make sure that when you're in these situations of goal conflict, you're somewhat aligned. I know if I ask someone to add a feature to the page, and I'm like, okay, this would take me about a day. This is a one-day job. And then I ask them 2 weeks later, and they're like, oh, I'm still not finished. Chances are, it's not that this is a slow programmer who's doing a bad job. Chances are their local rationality is very, very different than mine. They're like, I need to handle all the edge cases. I need to talk with some designers to make sure this looks good. I need to consult with other people. And my mentality was like, just bang it out. And so, you know, when you talk about it and you align, this is what happens. You know, everyone has their own local rationality. And like as a manager in particular, like you have to be open to learning. Like it's not about imposing your local rationality onto them. If you go to the meeting and say, oh, well, it took me a long time, to do this because X, Y, and Z, and you say, well, I just want you to bang it out. Next time, just bang it out. Chances are, there's a really good chance they're at the sharper end of the machine than you are. They know something you don't. You should probably be learning from them. There's a reason why they took the 2 weeks. And if you're not open to both sides, chances are things will not go well, at least between you and them as a manager. So I'm going to come back to this quote a little bit, and it really, I think, I'll explain it in a way that I think gets to my point about management. So, right before, errors are the other side of people trying to pursue success in an uncertain, resource-constrained world. Well, if we look at the sentence, someone I'm working with and I might not agree on any of the words in the sentence. You might not agree with me about what an error is. You certainly probably don't agree with me on the definition of success or what it really means to pursue it. And we obviously probably have a different sense of certainty as well. I'm probably certain about a lot of things you're not certain about, and you're probably certain about a lot of things that I'm not certain about. And certainly we all have different views on what resource constraints are and what resources are actually constrained. So unless you can really put yourself in the local rationality of the person you're working with and work these things out and get aligned on it, you're just going to continue to have communication problems that wind up looking like performance problems or people problems or like things in the old view that we just say, oh, I hired this person, bad apple, like you need to manage them out. We don't agree on anything, or they never do what I say is actually probably what many bad managers think. So yeah, that's kind of like, that's the point of my thing. The last thing I want to say is this is the book, The Field Guide to Understanding Human Error. And like there are gold nuggets on every page of this book. It's really good. It will change how you think about work. And it also has these amazingly like primitive illustrations in it that are worth the price of admission alone. This is a tunnel. There's obviously a disaster at the end of the tunnel, and this is a metaphor. The investigator should be in the tunnel seeing what the person who saw in the situation, rather than like standing outside and judging them with hindsight bias and saying like, well, gosh, you should have known that if you did this thing, a terrible thing would happen. Anyway, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much.